Good evening, everyone. My name is Paul Young. I'm just going to walk you through some government policies and economic trends in Brazil. And I'm going to base it on where the information has come available of May 2016, and just to give you a perspective of what's going on in Brazil. Now, my perspective is only one perspective. You're more than welcome to go out to the internet and do your own search from the IMF to banks like Bank of Nova Scotia, Financial Post, Moody's, with different sectors or different periodicals or groups to get their perspective of what's going on in Brazil. Here's a little bit about myself. I'm a CPA CGI trader. I focus on getting information out and having discussions on both solutions and what's driving performance within a country or a business segment. Now I'm going to talk about the interim government in Brazil, talk a bit about GDP, I'll talk about the economy, I'll talk about the banking sector, government policies, as well as corruption and even trade. So let's talk about in a nutshell in 20 seconds here. Basically, there's a new interim president that's replaced almost like a socialist president. And the whole premise of why there was a replacement is basically there's an ongoing investigation how a specific social program was funded, but because what's happening is basically in general was the social program was supposed to be funded by the Brazilian government from general revenue into the banks to give to low income families as some sort of social assistance. The problem was it was never properly funded, and the banks actually did the payouts, so the banks were on the hook for the money. So this is an area that basically is being investigated by the Brazilian government to see what needs to be done next. Nobody's been convicted yet, but the new president is really trying to bring in transparency and accountability as part of the overall finances of the Brazilian government. If we talk about Brazil, we have to talk about the GDP. Brazil is one of the largest economies in the world. It's grown significantly where it was in 2016. It's actually doubled in size, so it shows you that it's a significant player in the world market. So what's happening in Brazil is very critical in terms of what may happen part of the worldwide economy, so we need to understand that because we're going through periods of slow growth, and we've got an economy that's as big as Brazil that's a key player in Latin America that is struggling, and it's seen the last year 8% drop in GDP. Now this slide gives you a good example that in 2015 GDP declined by 8%. It's predicted to decline about 4% in 2016. Not sure if we'll see improvements in 2017. A lot's going to happen in terms of what the interim government does in terms of policy and what they're able to do to stimulate the economy and other aspects of what's going on with the export, and maybe some taxation reforms as well to kind of better manage what's going on. The good thing in Brazil's case, inflation is still only about 9%, so they haven't had a big hit on inflation. Let's talk about the budget's deficit. So if you look at this chart, they were as low as 2% of GDP in 2008. They've now like 5 times that now in 2015, and they're on track to be that maybe 15% to 20% as of 2016 due to low revenue. So it's a significant issues facing Brazil from the budget side and also the debt to GDP, which you will see in the next slide. If you look at the debt to GDP, they were at the lowest as 51% in 2011. They've gained about 15 points in 2015. They're likely to go a bit higher in 2016 due to the recession. So they're starting to creep up to debt issues. So the higher your debt issue also goes into your premium of your bonds, and that forces the interest cost for governments higher. And the higher you pay in interest costs impacts your ability to deliver social programs, which is critical to any sort of government's health. Let's talk about governance. Basically, there's an overview right now of the accountability. That's what the President Rousseff is being investigated on. So that's something to watch it play out over the next 12 months. The second thing is the financial sector is pretty solid there. Their bankings are pretty good there. There's not a big concern about any sort of insolvency issues, so it's something that to watch out to as well. So they're pretty good. They're pretty good, well capitalized. Now I want to talk about government policies, and this shows you what's happening with Brazil. At one time it was a major destination for foreign direct investment. It's actually seen about a 1/4 drop in FDI. FDI is critical because The Brazilian companies, Brazilian government needs that capital to help expand areas like sugarcane. They're the worldwide producer in ethanol. Also any sort of mining areas, oil and gas sector, any sort of food processing. This is all critical industries that drive Brazil that need foreign direct investment. The next area is policies also drive consumer prices, and we're seeing that for inflation about 9%. The tax policies in Brazil are pretty good. Their corporate tax rates are only about 15%. Their consumption taxes are 15%. So their taxation system is pretty fair. But what you're really going to get with the Brazilian government is how they work together as a team to make their social programs sustainable, and how they can clear up transparency and accountability and even bring in value for money concepts into government funding. Brazil's done well to clean up itself over the years. It's got ways to go yet. If you look at the ranking here, you're seeing 76 out of 168, so it's about the middle of the road in terms of where it's ranked. It's still got work to do, and as you've seen with some of the issues facing the Brazilian government now, there's work to be done. But it's come a long way, and that's why people now, when they feel comfortable with dealing with Brazil, they actually feel more success when they start dealing with the Brazilian government and the expanding opportunities in Brazil. I can't bring anything else when I want to talk about things too as well as Canada and Brazil. This shows you that total trade between Canada in 2009, it's a little bit dated, but it still shows you that it's significant. So Canada has $2.6 billion worth of imports from Brazil, and we export about $1.6 billion. Now, if we've got a slow economy in Brazil, they're not going to need as much imports, and they probably are not exporting as much to us either. So it's something we need to bear in mind, because exports are very critical to Canada. And what we're seeing in Latin America are some sluggish economies from Argentina to Brazil. We also seen the issues with the collapse in Venezuela. Colombia seems to be okay, but it's also not through the woods either, because it's got a dependency on everything else that's going in South America. So it's something to bear in mind as you're watching the trends play out in terms of what happens with these governments, as well as with policies in terms of what happens with consumer spending. The overall economic conditions need to be watched, and that's something that you don't hear a lot from mainstream media. For whatever reason, they're not discussing worldwide issues on international finance and trade, and that's critical, because in order for a country like Canada to be successful, it depends on exports. It also depends on foreign direct investment to attract that. If we're seeing failed government policies, or policies that not working properly in countries like Brazil, Argentina, Chile, Colombia, or elsewhere in Scandinavia, those are critical that will drive foreign direct investment, but also impact economic conditions. And if economic conditions go down, that means less money in the coffers. Less money in the coffers makes it difficult to have sustainability when you come to program spending, and that's something critical that's not discussed enough, because it's the economy that drives everything when it comes to the government finances. So what I wanted to do is cover a little bit about this, is to give you a little bit of an overview of what's going on in Latin America. I have done another presentation on Argentina, and I also have looked at Venezuela, to kind of give you a perspective of what's going on with those type of government policies, in terms of when you start listening to people that are promoting more socialism, to really get a good picture of where socialism at all costs doesn't work. And that's why it's really good to look at different countries to understand their pain points before you start really pushing an agenda that's not necessarily going to drive performance. Thank you.